Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back in the presence of greatness right here on Neil Pickup's Supernatural Strength Sports, and we're actually finishing a really interesting part of this for me. We've just been started with Petaluma and Over the Top. I got John Brzenk, I got Engin Terzi, the Enigma of Rage, and I've got No Limits, Devon Larratt, and myself, Engin, and Devon. We were just listening in that. It was really interesting, wasn't it? And we got some real insight on the sort of signal flare of arm wrestling.
We talk about something that only John knew about it, so we had to listen from the experience. Yes, of course. I could listen forever. Yeah.
Now, John, let's sort of talk about immediately in the aftermath of Over the Top. How did that sort of change your life, mate, from an arm wrestling perspective? How did arm wrestling change? Because we can see the ripple effect of it now. That was the original pebble in the pond, wasn't it?
Yeah. And like I said earlier, I mean, arm wrestling takes 3, 4, 5 years to really develop. And I think that was the spark to introduce the sport to a lot of the countries such as Russia and in Europe. But they didn't really become a force or didn't start really organizing tournaments and getting super competitive until the early 90s. Everybody expected Over the Top to really cause arm wrestling to be right there along with the NBA and football, and that just wasn't the case, obviously. But as far as the world goes, I think it was definitely was the spark.
What about the national tournaments in the States, the US Nationals and so on? Did you see a massive? I mean, when we saw the UAL, when we saw the World Arm Wrestling League, even the Yukon Jack to some extent, which we'll get to later on, we saw those big tournaments really increase the notoriety of the sport, and you started to see attendances go up. Was there a real blip on that?
Over the top? My memory of Over the Top, there was kind of a dead period, to be honest with you, after Over the Top. Everybody expected the arm wrestling to really take off, and between '86 and maybe the early '90s, there were still small tournaments going on around the country and that, but it wasn't the explosion that you're talking about with Yukon Jack and UAL. All those things were like mid '90s, right? Mid-late '90s. So there was, in my mind, there was kind of a dead time after Over the Top. It was
probably like Yukon Jack after that.
Yukon Jack? I guess Yukon Jack was early 90s, 92, 93. I guess it was earlier than what I was remembering.
The peak of the Yukon Jack was sort of 92 to 96, I think.
Right.
But let's sort of move gears a little bit. Obviously, from the flare of Over the Top, we then saw development of arm wrestling around the world. What the film did do was sort of plant that seed in everybody's mind. Myself, I saw obviously quite a lot of arm wrestlers come to the sport in the UK, in Germany, in a lot of the nations in Europe. The next time I saw you compete, John, wasn't actually in the World Arm Wrestling Championships. It was in another major tournament in the Bercy Stadium in Paris. And we'll come to that for Eurosport. Where you pulled Gary Goodridge in the final there. That's one for the moment. But what I was coming to was, at that time, we saw the development of the WAF, the World Arm Wrestling Federation, started to catch fire a little. And it started to see its own characters emerge. A couple of names there. Zauer. Obviously.
So, let's backtrack a little bit. So my first memory or thought of the fact that some other big, massive country is getting involved in the sport of arm wrestling was probably 4 years after Over the Top, and I think it was the first year of the Golden Bear tournament in Moscow. So I think that was the one that was, to me, like, oh, Russia's involved in arm wrestling now.
How did that come about, John? What made you aware of the Gold Bear? Were you sort of approached to represent the US?
I don't know how Igor, and I don't know what his last name was. Yeah. But I think he was in contact with Dave Devoto, so his tie was with Petaluma, because I remember going over there with Dave Devoto and the Petaluma team. But still, even you talk about Zaru, I don't even know if Zaru was there in 1990. I think he was there in 94. But
91
we went over there in 1990. A bunch of great athletes. They were like, jiu-jitsu, Roman Greco wrestling, Russia's top athletes, but none of them knew how to arm wrestle. I mean, it was a cakewalk for us.
Yeah.
But
so it was more of a
they quickly learned. I mean, obviously, years later they became a force. But.
So it was sort of in a way almost like an exhibition match. You guys went over to educate as well as which you've obviously done latterly, and Devin, you do a massive amount of that now, mate. You're sort of the special envoy of World Arm Wrestling. You pop up all over the place, and we've seen a similar effect. That pollination that we've seen from yourself in Australia. Obviously, a lot of the Asian countries. You've done quite a lot of that recently, mate.
Yeah, it's neat. I feel like depending on how fertile the ground is, about 4 or 5 years, and you get people starting to approach that North American standard.
I would agree.
Yeah.
So, John, when the World Arm Wrestling Federation got underway, were you aware of it? Was it talked about at the US Nationals when you went to the US tournaments, or was it sort of just a completely disparate element that was going on?
I do remember the WAF. I just at that time, I even in the early stages, I just wasn't interested in it because it was so difficult to get to in my mind. I mean, you had to go to the Nationals, spend money. There was no money offered in the Nationals, and then you would have to spend money and go to the Worlds, which there was no money involved at all. And back in the time, to try to get a sponsor to foot the bill, even partially foot the bill, was near impossible. So it just never interested me to pursue the WAF stuff. I don't know. I just felt like I guess I was above that already. I don't know.
Best of US was already dominating the WAF till 1994. It's 1994 that Georgians and Russians started to dominate. But
it's interesting.
But still, the best of the North Americans wasn't coming.
When we the early days of the World Arm Wrestling Federation, from my experience, which was 89. 90, 91, 92. I always remember 92 was an absolutely phenomenal tournament in Geneva. And it was at that time where the World Arm Wrestling Federation started to see some guys in there that were genuinely dangerous. They were able to challenge the top North Americans. At that time, you had the likes of Burt Whitfield, Wayne Burns, Cobra Rhodes, guys of that ilk. Brian Shea was another one. Robert Redden was another one, and there were others. Janning, guys that were pretty solid forces, not necessarily the best of the best, but without doubt, the first North American superstar was Cobra Rhodes. Cobra in the late 80s and early 90s was a force in the World Championships, dominating much bigger men, pulling the reigning heavyweight champions at that time. They used to actually have the champion of the champions in the World Arm Wrestling Federation. It actually lost popularity. Probably after 2001 was the last time that I saw the champion of the champions event take place. But that used to be such a fascinating event when you'd see guys from all weight divisions, and you'd see guys emerge who were dominant forces, people like Sharon Remez, Nir Harel, the Stonewall from Israel. A lot of really strong guys. But I always remember in 92, that was the first time that I ever saw Cobra in a real battle. He pulled a Georgian guy. Jimmy
Merabishvili.
And that was the first time he ever was in a real battle. Prior to that, it was always a cakewalk. And I think that year in itself sort of really crystallized itself as the year where it started to become more of a level playing field. Obviously, you had top Canadians there as well. Serge Usero. Don't even know whether Serge has been active in 15 years. The last time I think I saw Serge Usero was about 95 in Canada, but he was world champion in Geneva that year. Very, very interesting time in the sport. At that time, John, sort of early 90s, was there an awareness then in the States generally that there were other nations that were getting to that kind of level?
Oh, yeah, no. But like I said, I didn't participate. The only tournament I went to, and it's because I heard that they were gonna have a super match for some cash, was the one that Devin was at in Japan in 1999, or I probably wouldn't.
The only reason I went too.
Is it really, Devin?
Yeah, my brother was involved in a couple of them, and in fact, I think you speak of the Georgians.
Virginia Beach, 96.
He ended up beating
also 95 Brazil.
Yeah, I think 95.
Yes, he was. He was in Brazil, and he was in 96 Virginia.
So my brother, so my brother Bill was more active in the WAF and probably knew more guys than I ever knew as far as that goes with WAF.
He was in the final with Irakli Gukyani of Georgia.
96.
Yeah,
Virginia. In 95, he was in final with the Bongard.
Yeah.
In Brazil. Yeah. Like John, arm wrestling started in 1988 in Turkey, but we didn't hear your name till middle of the 90s, because there was no internet. All we knew who my teammates saw at WAF. We remember.
Gotcha. Right.
Yeah. The heroes were Cobra, Sharon Remes, Gary Goodrich, Richard Lapkus, and Leslie Williams, Chad Silvers, Jerry Jennings. These were like the main guys. We never knew your name. And after the internet get involved and people had more connection with the outside of the Europe, then we started
went back further in history.
Yeah, there is another level. Like whenever, the interesting thing is in 1994, Zaur beat Clive Dean easily in Sweden. Yeah.
Yes.
And following year in Yukon Jack, he beat Zaur easily.
Right. Let me ask you, Devin. I mean, what's your involvement with WAF? You weren't involved other than 99. Did you participate in any more WAF tournaments?
So
2005 in Finland as well.
No,
Japan. Japan was 05. Japan was 05.
No.
99.
Yeah.
No, the other.
Oh, another Japan.
2000. It was Finland 2000. Rovaniemi. Yeah. So I was back in regular army, and they paid for everything. I was one of those government-sponsored athletes. So they paid for everything. So I got a ticket to go to Japan and then to Finland the next year, and then that's it. Then
you got financed for those shows.
What's that?
You got financed for those shows. They paid for you to go, and it's wow. That's nice work if you can get it, brother.
Yeah. So I was sponsored, and then I switched jobs, and that was done. So no more. And that was my last year that I ever did it.
Yeah.
It's just the thing that always I kind of in the same boat as John. Like I always wondered which countries were getting money. Like for me, when I was getting money to go do it, that was a great deal. I would have done that over and over. But as soon as I had to pay, I was like, man, I just way rather go to Mike Gould Classic.
Right.
No.
Right. So Engin, I mean, to dispel the rumors that you guys get paid a lot of money in Turkey and all these.
In the past. Yeah, like 2 years ago, 1.5 years ago, I won World Championships. They paid me about $2,000 only.
So you still get something, yeah. And what was your reign as a WAF champion? Well, how many years and what years? What was the range?
I started in 1993 till 2018, but many World Championships I didn't participate for some reasons.
Gotcha.
Yeah, but we didn't have the government support till 1998.
You hear so many rumors over here. Like, I mean, I've heard things like the guys in Azerbaijan, they're getting $100,000. Like, you hear crazy stuff. To me, I feel like wherever your biggest prize is, that's your world championships. And for North America, I don't think it's ever really been our world championships. But I think for some countries, it very much has been.
What was the money at the Gold Bear, mate? Did you get any cash incentive there?
Oh, gotta think. Yeah, no, it was money, but I'm thinking that it was like a couple thousand or 1,500 or so. I won. Well, the first year that I went there, I supposedly had won a brick making machine. and they gave me a certificate with a picture of this machine that made bricks. But obviously, I couldn't get that on the airplane to bring it home with me, so it stayed behind, and hopefully somebody made a few buildings.
A brick making machine.
Correct, a brick making
nice.
machine. Yeah, so it must have been. It was one of the sponsors, obviously, but never did see it.
It was now.
Yeah, I wish I had it now. I wish I would have been able to organize the employment for that.
So, if we sort of wind the clock forward, one other thing I wanted to ask you about was the Bercy Stadium, Paris, mate. Because that was pretty well attended by a small selection of superstar arm wrestlers. Goodridge was there. You were there.
Sharon, Cobra,
the Sassini brothers.
Yeah.
You know how. Nancy Locke was there. Leander Frayne. There were how did that?
I have a really bad, bitter taste in memory of that tournament, and I don't know how or quick it came about. I think it was kind of a spur of the moment thing, and there were so many promises, and they were giving diamonds away, and this, that, and the other, and it was just it never came through like they had touted. So, I've in my mind, I've kind of erased that tournament. Like, it wasn't one of the big tournaments in my mind. Yes, it was in a big stadium, big arena, and I think they were charging people to get into it, and they tried to make it some big, like UFC type show. They wanted everybody to, act some parts and be crazy, and they were giving extra money away to the craziest, antics and that. But to me that was a shit promotion.
Now, following that, the next sort of major tournament that I'm aware of, where you started to see this collection of star pullers, was probably, and I'm going to sort of backtrack a little bit here, okay? Because, as Engin rightly said, the European countries, we knew the guys who'd attended World Arm Wrestling Federation. So we were aware of all the guys that Engin talked about, particularly Cobra. I remember Houston, Texas, 91. Cobra had obviously dominated everywhere else. Went over to watch the Worlds there, and Cobra's in battles with guys like Dave Patton. And suddenly it was sort of this eye-opener, like, holy, there's more of them that are that good. It was like, blew my mind. Couldn't believe it. And Brian Shea, other guys of that sort of magnitude, Robert Redden, that were top-class pullers and later came into the World Arm Wrestling Federation. But at that time, they'd sort of kept themselves behind closed doors a little bit. That sort of opened my eyes and made me think, right, well, I'll tell you what, from a young man who's getting into the sport, this is where it's at. I've got to go. And I think it's probably fair to say, Engin, you went on a similar pilgrimage at around a similar time, mate. We followed a different path, but it joined in a lot of ways. I thought to myself, well, if you want to get good at this sport and you want to be the best at this sport, you got to go to the States because that's where the guys are.
Yeah, that's why I went there.
And then we come across the Yukon Jack World Championships. And my first experience of Yukon Jack was 94, 95, 96. All those tournaments were stacked. I mean, they were ridiculous level competitions. What was sort of what was the thing about Yukon Jack, mate? How did that come about? When did you sort of first come on your radar? Because I think it's fair to say that was probably the Nemiroff / Zloty tour of the day. It was the hardest, most stacked tournament probably on earth.
Yeah, no, it was. Are you asking me? It was a big promotion, obviously. So I think the twist on it was difficult to get liquor advertisement on television. So Yukon Jack came up with the idea, or somebody came up with the idea, to use arm wrestling as a way to introduce this beverage on the major networks. So Yukon Jack would go into different marketplaces throughout the United States, I think 8, maybe 10 throughout the year, and hit all the news about this sport of arm wrestling. And of course, it was associated with the name Yukon Jack. We all wore the Yukon Jack shirts, and so it was a big, a lot of money behind that promotion. And I'm trying to remember how they formatted it. I think you had to win first or second to be in the finals. So yeah,
we never saw that. We were allowed to go.
It was a tough crowd.
Yeah, but the internationals, you just go straight to the final.
Right.
You know.
Okay, maybe they opened it up that.
Worlds. So
they opened it up that way.
Was that if you've done okay at Worlds, you got to attend Yukon, Jack.
I think that $3,500 was the winner prize.
Yeah, no, it was. Yeah. There again, in the mid-90s, it's decent money. I mean, that was decent money back.
I think 1994 was still like a North American tournament. Beginning with the 95, it became more international. 95 and 96 became. Yes, I saw some Georgians and Russians there.
Svetlana Gashevsky was there in 95. I was there in 95.
Latvia was
there in 95.
Right.
New York.
Right.
Yeah. Andreas went there. Andreas
Sundström was there in 95, 96.
Yeah.
Won it in 96, actually.
Yeah.
Andreas.
Yeah.
And they had television coverage. It was a little more diluted than, what sports was. I mean, we're talking 10 years later, and I think it was ESPN that covered it, but it was, so it definitely had the allure to come because of the TV coverage that it had. But yeah, no, the big deal with Yukon Jack was the promotion behind the finals was going to all these markets, and they had a professional New York promotional thing that would call all the news stations. So we typically go into a big city like Chicago and be on CBS, NBC, ABC, all the major networks in the morning, and explaining the sport of arm wrestling. So in that respect, it was definitely a good little spurt of time that they got involved in the sport.
And were you at that time involved in the promotion, John?
I was. Initially, I wasn't. It was Ray Darling and Dave Patton, and then somehow I ended up getting asked to be involved in it, and I think that for 4 years, kind of out of my element, but I learned to do it, and it was fun.
Mm-hmm. Devon, where were you at this time, mate? What did the world of arm wrestling feature at that time, or still too early, mid-90s?
Starting to do it with people who actually know what they're doing. Like, I loved arm wrestling my whole life, but 94 was my first tournament ever. Like 94, 95. I joined the reserves in 95, 96. I was in the Army. I didn't really seriously start competing until 98. So 98, I would say, is my first year when I was even worth, I was even on a map anywhere. I got like third place at the Canadian Nationals in 98. 99 was the first year that I won my nationals and then went to Worlds. So this is all still kind of before my time and relevancy. And it's like right around like mid to late 90s, even the internet wasn't really rocking. So I wasn't even really properly plugged in yet.
Did you have, obviously a lot of top Canadians pulling in those events. To mention a few names, there were John Roberts, Pat Mastrangelo. You had obviously Mike Gould was there, and Garth Carlson.
Yep.
A lot of guys that I was good friends with actually at that time.
Yeah. So all guys kind of taught me how to arm wrestle.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So
Aaron Rangel. What was his name? Aaron Lengel?
Aaron Lengel. So Aaron. Yeah, Dion, Aaron's brother, Dion actually taught Aaron how to arm wrestle. Dion also taught me how to arm wrestle. Dion was my first coach, but that was out west in the oil field. Then I came back to Ontario, got plugged in with guys like Mike, Garth, Troy, all these guys who were rocking that scene.
I just want to mention real quick, Neil. I mean, you talk about these tournaments, Yukon Jack and Gobert. There were some big, massive rocking tournaments up in the bush country in like Amos, Quebec, Canada at the time.
Yeah, there was.
that were bigger than any of these things that we're talking about. That would fill a hockey stadium full of people and that just love the sport. So I mean, where were you then? I mean,
the funny thing is,
some of the guys that you mentioned, I actually remember them being at that. The Canadian tournament up in. I think the sponsor was Labatt's or something up in the Amos, out in the middle of nowhere. But
yeah, and I think that's where Goodridge really cut his teeth, and a lot of those guys, to be honest, there were a number of absolutely, like again, Serge Usero, other guys of that ilk, that we'd see come down to the Yukon Jacks. But in answer to the question, John, that the reason we're there and the reason Yukon Jacks on my list of must hits is because it was, again, something that was universally seen and recognized as the place to be, you know, and that was, that's what I'm trying to really get to. Where were the most, the notoriety, because those events which I became aware of from speaking to the Americans, when I come over there, they say, "Oh, Neil, you should come back to this. This is amazing. Get up to Canada, do this, do that." But it was hard to do that. You know, my first shot at Canada was Edmonton Worlds '93. You know, where Gary won, and there were a lot of, and it was just like, again, it was sort of like, whoa. Back then, the Worlds were raw. You know, they weren't polished like they are now. It was like spit and sawdust Street Fighter world. You know, it was awesome. Really, really interesting, entertaining. I don't know. It was a bit more visceral somehow, you know. It really was. It was ace, absolute quality. But the Yukon Jack got the word out there. As I say, we saw guys like Svetan Gashevsky attend '95, Lee Holland, people like that, because the world had become aware of Yukon Jack, and if you wanted to be the man, you had to sort of cement it. We'd go to the WAF Worlds, and it was kind of like the opposite of what's now. You know, in the sorry, go on, Engin.
What I realized that, you know, at the middle of the 90s, Europeans were still technically behind the Americans. They had the power. They had power, but still they were like, they looked like amateurs against the top American pullers.
Yeah, you had pockets of excellence, guys that were quite unique. People like Andreas Rundstrom, who was the trailblazer. You know, very unique style, and he went over there and had his own way with people. You know, just because of the open style he pulled in. Devon, were you ever aware of Andreas Rundstrom?
Oh yeah, listen, I'm a huge fan of arm wrestling, and I've gone back and I've watched all the stuff that you can find. Andreas, you know, he's got that real side. Yeah, it's great.
Iron wrist, almost straight wrist on the top roll, just really open and you know, really through your thumb, but so dangerous.
Yeah, and he's another one of these guys that the rumor has it really never really did a lot of extracurricular, like didn't you know, just arm wrestled and
right.
No, mate, let me tell you now. I've been to tournaments with Andreas Rundstrom. He would be pissed as a chimp. The dude was a hard drinker. You know, you carry him out. Him and his brother Jonas. I fought the pair of them in a hotel night before. I mean, they were rough ass lads. You know what I mean? Great dudes, though. Absolutely. And a lot of the Swedes back then were that. You know, they were like that. They were just had a lot of fun. They were just. But the man was an arm wrestling machine, mate. It was made for the game. Just an awesome arm wrestler. You know.
Yeah.
In those years,
I would argue, you know, I still argue to this day that's you know, that makes pretty close to the best arm wrestler you can be if you just do a lot, you know, you participate a lot in the sport of arm wrestling. I mean, yeah, the muscles are flashy, the machines are, you know, good for gauging, but it really just comes down to having a passion for the sport and spending a tremendous amount of time on the table.
Tom Holland, Ryan Bowen, Schoolboy, Jordan Davis, Engin Terzi. Case in point. Dude, you were never you were the most obsessed arm wrestler, Engin, I'm going to say, that I've ever met, mate. Ever.
Okay, how did we come to this point now?
I've known you a long time, and you are the most.
No. I mean the subject. You know, we were talking about something else, and then
because we got distracted. The goat threw a point in. He was talking about what makes you the very best arm wrestler you can be, and we're just going to dip our toe into that.
The only one that I couldn't prove myself to is myself.
Yeah, I think it's changing now. I think that everybody on this call loves arm wrestling like crazy, and we've all spent a lot of time on the arm wrestling table, but I think that it's changing a little bit. I think that people are figuring out that there's a few places that you need to be really strong, and I think that there's people who are able to just get so strong in these movements now that to say that you can do it without the gym now, I think is questionable. I do. I don't think you can make a Levon on an arm wrestling table alone. I don't think you can.
Hold that thought, Devon Larratt, because we got to bring the curtain down on show number 2. Guys, if you enjoy In the Presence of Greatness, we'll be back very soon with these usual suspects. Remember, like, share, subscribe, and we'll see you soon.